Looks like we are live. Trying to get Queer POTUS connected here. Oh, there we are.
Oh, duh.
Queer POTUS.
Hi.
Welcome. All right.
Hey. Can y'all hear me?
Yes, we can. Welcome.
Yes, I can.
Excellent.
All
Hello.
right. So we're still waiting for Izzy. Kyle and Simba unfortunately couldn't join us today. But I am. Let's see. Well, I screwed that part up already. Oh well. There we go. That makes things nicer. So, just a moment. There we go. Okay. Looks like Brianna's library is with us. Hello, neighbor.
Awesome.
Brianna is actually kind of my neighbor. All right. So we're still waiting for Izzy, but hopefully,
Sorry.
she will be with us soon. Anyhow, so welcome everyone to part 11 now of our public study group on the German Revolution by Pierre Broué. We are now today working on chapters 39 through 42. And last time we left off, we were talking all about the general strike in August that brought down the Kuno government. And today we're going to be talking about kind of the abortive insurrection that that happened in October. So before we get started, I like to give everyone a chance to introduce themselves and kind of do, we usually do names, pronouns, and if you have a YouTube channel or a blog or whatever, welcome to plug that. And then just maybe a quick, like, one sentence of why you think the German Revolution is an important thing to study. So, yeah, I'll start. I'm Melody, she, her pronouns. This is my YouTube channel called A World to Win, and I talk about history and politics and all kinds of stuff like that from kind of a Marxist perspective. And I think especially considering the absolute explosion of current events, especially those happening in my own city of Portland, there are major lessons to be learned here from the German Revolution in the ascendance of nationalism and fascism and the repression of the left, and the relationship between the left and the state, and all kinds of other potent and sometimes very tragic lessons in that. So I will hand things off to Axel or Queer POTUS. Do you want to introduce yourself next?
Sure. Hi, I'm Axel. Yes, I'm Axel. My pronouns are he and him. I'm a history professor at the State University of New York in Potsdam. My field of specialization is modern German history, so of course I have an interest, a professional but also a personal interest in the German Revolution. And given this resurgence of revolutionary activities at the moment. The German Revolution is more relevant than ever before, in terms of lessons to be learned, in terms of similarities between now and then, and in terms of differences as well. We might want to talk about what the revolution today looks like, and if it continues to radicalize, will look like, and how the context has changed since the time period between 1917, 1918, and 1923. So there's lots to talk about, and I'm looking forward to it.
Great. And yeah, Queer POTUS, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Queer POTUS. People usually just shorten it to POTUS. They just call me POTUS sometimes for short, so you can call me POTUS. My pronouns are they. I'm not really wedded to pronouns in particular, so I also sometimes just use he or she or whatever I'm kind of feeling at the moment. But they is a good pronoun to use with me as a general rule. Let's see. I started as a YouTuber doing videos on United States presidents. And when you do videos about presidents, you ultimately start talking about imperialism. So before you know it, all you're talking about is imperialism. And then you're like, wait, I'm hanging out with Marxists all the time. What's going on? So my channel is still talk about US presidents, but we've gone beyond into some of these more revolutionary spheres. You can see that on Queer POTUS. That's the channel. If you could sub to that, that would be really great. I'm also on Twitch from time to time talking about presidents, world history, and playing Rocket League with my roommate Connor. Why the German Revolution is important? Well, I think that revolution is a fact of life, especially in a capitalist modern society like the one that we live in. If humanity is going to continue to pursue the route of capitalism, if that's the decision humanity makes, it can expect to encounter revolution. And my understanding of world revolution history, unfortunately, is very linear. I kind of go USSR, China, and then I haven't really humanity is going to the German Revolution enough. So I'd like to expand my own understanding of what this fact of life that is revolution is all about. And so I'd like to see a different side of it through Germany.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So usually how these streams work, they're pretty relaxed. They're pretty, this is a very heavy academic text that we're working our way through. So we like to kind of let things breathe and explain any, big heavy terminology that gets used, and, not, there's a lot of name dropping that Broué does in this book, and I frankly get pretty dizzy by it. So I have to pause every once in a while and look at the big glossary of names and acronyms in the back of the book. So we always welcome our live chat on YouTube to ask your questions and leave comments and your reflections, whatever. This is the way we set this up is very much to be like a casual study group amongst friends, and with the exception of our guest Axel here, none of us are experts on German history, and so this pedagogical approach, this approach to learning and teaching, is designed to be as accessible as possible. And we make sure to make the PDF of the book available to anybody who needs it. I'll be posting the link to that in the chat later. So the format of these streams is usually such that we spend the first half or so just doing our chapter summaries, going through chapter by chapter, and we usually go through no more than 4 chapters at a time. So yeah, we're gonna start Axel has kindly offered to summarize chapter 39, and Queer POTUS, POTUS here has offered to summarize chapter 40. We are down two guests, two co-hosts today, so I'm gonna try to fill in for them as best I can. So bear with me on that. I am doing my best. Anyway, so yeah, without further ado, Axel, are you ready to get us started?
Yes, absolutely. Chapter 39 is called Preparing the Insurrection, and it's right in between the over the government and the and the Moscow view of the German chapter 40. And in terms of the time period covered, it goes from November 1922, when the Wilhelm Kuno government collapsed, was forced to collapse for general strike, until August 1923. So, by the way, I'm glad, Melody, you referred to the glossary, which is very helpful. Of course, no book perfect, and Broué's book is not perfect either. One problem with the glossary is it focuses largely on the and is from other political formations are not really mentioned in the glossary. For example, Wilhelm Kuno, the chancellor, who was from forced to resign, about him a little bit because he is sort of an interesting and distasteful guy. Also, in terms of his role later on,
Axel, can I actually interrupt you for just a moment?
After he has
really glitching out. Audience is having a hard time hearing you. Would you? Do you think you could maybe hang up and call back?
Yeah, I can try that. No problem.
All right. Bear with us, folks. Bear with us, folks. All right. So while we're trying to fix that, I figured I could ask POTUS here. What's your academic background, if you'd be so inclined to share that with us?
So I went to school for Russian language and studied Russian for 3 years, graduated, went to St. Petersburg for some graduate stuff, but never completed it. Lived in Vladivostok, Yekaterinburg, Irkutsk. I also speak pretty decent Chinese, and I lived in China for a while, then Japan. I was in a band for a while, so nice. Now I work at a museum.
All right, we're trying to get...
Yeah.
Axel, can you are you with us here? I'm seeing that you're lighting up, but
yeah, can you hear me?
Oh, that sounds much better.
Yes, that's much better. I think perhaps the webcam was interfering. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but the audio is coming in much cleaner now.
So everyone can hear me now.
A little bit better. It's not great, but it's significantly better.
Okay, so I want to take advantage of the opportunity to say a few things before I cut out again. So, Wilhelm Kuno, I wish there had been some information on Kuno in the glossary, because I don't know to what extent you were able to talk about him a little bit. and his role after he resigned or was forced to resign from his position as German Chancellor, because he framed himself as an apolitical expert, as a person who was interested in just running things in a technocratic fashion without being tied to party politics or ideologies in any fashion. But later on, in the late 1920s, he actually becomes an economic advisor to Adolf Hitler. It's very alarming, that many of these people who see themselves as technocrats very much have a political agenda when it comes to defending capitalism. Okay, can you still hear me?
It's very crackly and laggy, but it's not quite as bad as it was a moment ago.
Okay, so my chapter has several subheadings that deal with these 2 months and what happens during that time period in terms of the revolutionary upwave being welcomed and discussed in Moscow, the events being discussed and deliberated on in Germany, the military preparations, the mobilization of activists, and then the situation in September of 1923. So essentially, in August, political leaders in the German Communist Party, as well as political leaders at the Comintern, are surprised by the upswing in revolutionary activities. They are surprised because they did not expect the masses to push for revolutionary action, for an insurrection. So Novia, for example, comes back from his vacation in the Caucasus, and he and Bukharin and Radek and Trotsky and Piatnitsky and Kasinin and many others, they try to figure out what to do, and they invite representatives from the German Communist Party as well, and the German Communist Party is essentially divided into 2 major wings. One wing that will be represented in Moscow by Heinrich Brandler, and another wing that is represented by Ruth Fischer and Arkady Maslow. The Brandler wing is more cautious, while the Fischer and Maslow wing is more, well, their opponents call them or accuse them of adventurous policies. But the interesting thing is both wings, the Brandler wing and the Fischer-Maslow wing, agree that this is a revolutionary situation. And if there's any kind of disagreement, the disagreement is largely about whether it's possible to fix a date for the actual revolution. Trotsky, who has an immense amount of credibility, an immense amount of prestige, because he's seen as the key organizer of the Bolshevik insurrection in 1917, argues it is necessary to have a tight program and fixed date as well. Can you still hear me okay?
Hello?
Hello? What's up?
Am I the only one still here?
No. Axel's still with
Hello?
us. Or hello?
Maybe the whole world lost the
Yes.
internet. I don't know. Or anything?
Can
I'm
you
gonna
still hear
sip
me?
my duck pen.
I think Queer POTUS is having.
Can anyone in the chat hear me?
Yeah, I can hear everyone.
Yeah, I can hear everyone too. I think Queer POTUS might be having difficulties. I want to just thank the chat real quick for bearing with us. There's no shortage of technical problems.
I have literally no idea what happened.
Everyone, chat can.
I still have internet.
Chat says they can hear you, POTUS.
So shall I continue?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Okay, great. So, the interesting thing is there is a broad consensus that this is indeed a evolutionary situation in the making, and if there's disagreement, it's the disagreement about whether it's possible to have a fixed date and whether the revolution is a matter of weeks or a matter of months. Brandler thinks it is a matter of months, while Fischer and Maslow think in terms of weeks. And Fischer and Maslow are supported by Trotsky and Zinoviev, while Radek supports Brandler's position. So the next kind of big issue to be explored in the chapter is how to prepare for the revolutionary uprising in terms of military preparation. There is a military apparatus within the German Communist Party, and is armed force, about 100,000 people, workers, the so-called proletarian hundreds, who have weapons. Now, it's interesting because it's difficult to assess how many weapons are actually available. Broué talks about how the numbers differ from between 600 to 50,000, which of course makes quite a difference. So if the most optimistic number is correct, 50,000 rifles, then about half of the workers who are part of the armed proletarian 100s would be able to carry weapons. So there's some infrastructure there, but it's not enough. So the Russians, the Russian comrades, send in support in terms of Red Army officers and technicians. But as Broué points out, one should not overstate how many actual Russians were sent into Germany, because many of the people who came as Russians, they were actually German comrades who had experience during World War I. Some of them had officer rank, and so on and so forth. So then there is some discussion about preparations in terms of the level of enthusiasm of rank and file activists, and Broué points out that the sober German comrades were positively under the spell of revolutionary ecstasy. That's a direct quote, because of the real as well as perceived Russian support in terms of some money, in terms of what they perceived as methodical, scientific leadership. There were some expectations about perhaps Trotsky coming into Germany, even though that did not really work out, also because of the power struggle in Moscow. Lenin was incapacitated at that point. The Troika was in power, meaning Stalin, Kamenev, and Zinoviev. And Zinoviev and Trotsky were on opposite ends and tried to undercut one another. So things were complicated by that power struggle. That's incidentally something that I wish Broué would have fleshed out a little more. Also, I think one or another weakness of Broué's account is that while he focuses very eloquently and in a very detailed fashion on developments within the German left, he does not provide as much information and certainly no systematic analysis on developments across the political spectrum. And of course, the German political left interacted with other formations. Case in point is the attempts on part of revolutionary activists to forge contacts with German officers, commissioned officers as well as non-commissioned officers and rank-and-file Reichswehr soldiers in order to get them on their side. So it would have been interesting to have a more systematic discussion of to what extent these efforts were successful, to what extent they could have been successful, meaning some more systematic exploration in terms of the mindset, the background, the sensibilities of those people they try to win over. Okay, and then of course, as September comes, things begin to become more problematic because of events in Bavaria. In Bavaria, von Kahr, right-wing figure, far right-wing figure, essentially takes over and becomes the de facto leader of Bavaria. And eventually, this will set the stage for what will be known as the beer hall putsch, with Hitler and Ludendorff trying to come to power in a right-wing coup. So we see things changing as the German Communist Party and the Comintern get serious and systematic about preparing for an insurrection. The revolutionary wave among the working class begins to lose steam, and the far right begins a counteroffensive in Bavaria, which will be sort of dealt with in the coming chapters. That's sort of the gist of chapter 39.
Great, thank you. Now we have a little bit of time to breathe, if that's what's wanted, if we want to talk about that a little bit, or if POTUS, if you want to just dive right into the chapter 40 summary, that would be totally acceptable as well. How are folks feeling about that?
I could use a minute just to kind of put
no
myself
worries.
there.
Yeah, no worries.
A breather would be good.
So yeah, I'm struck in this reading by a couple things. One of them being how I'm imagining that it was very difficult for the KPD to be kind of accurately assessing the mood, like both like the mood of the masses and like the like objective alignment of forces. Eve says my mic is very soft. Sorry, I'm trying to. I'm doing my best here. Don't know what's going on with that. Voice settings. I can try boosting myself. It says the input volume's all the way up, so I'm not sure what more I can do about that. But let me know if it gets worse. I'll try speaking up a little bit. See if that
I
helps.
can hear you perfectly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can hear you really well.
I think the chat I think there might be something on the user end that's not working right. I think you guys can hear me, but I think chat is having a hard time hearing me. So I'm going to talk a little bit closer to the mic. Anyhow,
Great.
yeah, I'm just struck by like,
Yeah.
I'm imagining that would be incredibly difficult for anyone on the ground in that situation to both have like a firm grasp on like both assessing the mood of the masses and also like having a good analysis of the objective like alignment of forces, because everything really did seem to be kind of up in the air. I don't know, does that ring true with anyone else? Axel, would you say that that's a fair assessment?
Absolutely. And also because things change so quickly, and there's a lot of pressure on them because so much rides on getting it right. I mean, the Russian comrades look at the German Revolution as the real thing. The Russian Revolution to them was just a prelude, but the fate of the entire socialist project is really to them decided by what happens, what is going to happen in Germany.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a great deal of enthusiasm. I was struck by, for example, Broué's comments on how in Russia there were efforts to encourage people to learn German because the expectation was very soon, many of us have a chance to go to Germany to help the German Revolution, and at the same time not messing it up by either being too adventurous or by being too fatalist.
Yeah.
Enthusiasm and at the same time the danger of failing, of getting it wrong.
Yeah, and like I also wanted to comment on that, which is that I think from their very real experience, as we've been talking about through this whole study group, which is that they had both errors had already of what you just described, like the adventurism and the conservatism were like always kind of in a tug of war with each other, and it was, I think, very difficult for them to parse out what was the right move to make at any given time. And sometimes they did make the right move, and sometimes I think that, like, for example, in the wake of the March action back in, what was that, 1920? Am I wrong about that? March 1920?
Yes.
Yeah, so I think the March action, just to remind folks, was a kind of a misfire of a kind of another abortive insurrection that the KPD was all hands on deck for, and it did not go well. And so I think there was maybe it left such a bad taste in folks' mouths that I think there was kind of an overcorrection to conservatism, and like mean, like, again, like I said, like throughout this whole, 5-year period or so, I think these are dueling tensions of like action versus passivity, and like, are we, stomping on the gas too hard? Are we not doing it hard enough? Do we need to stomp on the brakes? I think these are all kind of political questions that I think as we're discovering through this study, they do not have easy answers, and it can be really easy to kind of overcorrect, and in response to kind of subjective factors, and it can be very difficult to assess accurately what's going on, and how to move on it. Anyway, POTUS, are you ready to take us with chapter
Yes.
40? Take it
I'd be
away.
happy to start. Okay. So I'm glad that Professor Axel Fair-Schulz talked about the enthusiasm in Russia at the very end there, because that really segues nicely into what chapter 40 is all about. In fact, it goes to the most, I would say, almost blindly enthusiastic person about what was going on in Germany, and that was Comrade Zinoviev. And it starts by telling us that Comrade Zinoviev put out 8 articles in, I think, Pravda. Yeah. Called Problems of the German Revolution. So yeah, he did. There was some skepticism there, I suppose. But it was really rah kind of stuff. And I'll get into what Zinoviev wrote in those articles. It says that they were translated into, I suppose, I'm assuming German, and given to the KPD where they were distributed. But I think somewhere later in the article, in the chapter, it said that these things were taken out of circulation after things went sour. I don't want to spoil too much, but so we're going to get into some of the meat of what these letters actually said. So Zinoviev really sees the victory of the German Revolution as a guarantee. I want to give you just a little bit. I did a little extra side research. So this was right after, you might have gone over this, but Lenin had a stroke. So he was kind of out of the picture. And Stalin and Zinoviev and I think Kamenev maybe teamed up against Trotsky. So this was like Zinoviev's big year, I guess, in a lot of ways. And Zinoviev was very, very enthusiastic about the promise of a revolution in Germany. And I think, again, Professor Axel Fair-Schulz talked about the fact that he mentioned that for Russia, it was like the revolution in Germany was what it was all about. That what was going on in Russia was just the start of it. Although I found that Stalin did not completely see it that way. Anyway,
a little less enthusiastic about it. I think a chapter says he had some reservations about its possibility, and I think he was, if I recall from the chapter, that he said that he thought it would happen like in spring or something.
I have one quote from Stalin actually that I dug up.
Okay.
A letter from Stalin to Zinoviev. He says, at the moment, German communists. Sorry, I should tell you when this is. August 7th, 1923. At the moment, German communists have nothing of the kind. They have, of course, a Soviet country as a neighbor, which we do not have. But what can we offer them at this time? Should power in Germany, so to speak, topple over now and the communists seize it, they would end up crashing. That is the best case. In the worst case, they will be smashed to smithereens. So he was very cynical at times about it. But he also spoke out positively about it, maybe to sort of not end up like Zinoviev and did on the eve of the revolution, seeming like he was enthusiastic about it, but in private seemed to express doubts. Anyway, he was also consolidating his power during that period of time, Zinoviev guys were on the Rise of Germany. That kind of makes Zinoviev vulnerable later. So in these articles, it's very revolutionary press, rah rah rah, ahead, forward. You know, and you find that the Russians see a strong parallel, almost like they're not able, or at least in Zinoviev's case, he's not able to actually see the German Revolution from the ground. He doesn't see it in all its intricate detail, but he sees it through the lens of the Russian Revolution. The faithfulness of October, you know, and this is when Zinoviev publishes his articles, October. So there's this mythology here going. And in fact, he mentions, you know, the road which cost the Russian Revolution 12 years from 1905 to 1917 will have been covered by the German Revolution in 5 years from 1918 to 1923. So already in a Russo-centric version. Then he goes and lists all these important events from the Russian Revolution, like the Kornilov affair and the first coalition, the Grand Coalition, and sort of pairs them with events he sees going on in Germany, sort of saying like, look, you know, the thing that happened here is starting to happen there. He says this is on top, but even more than that, even more than those aesthetic similarities, underneath all of this, the people, the masses, the movement is boiling over. The German working people are ready to go. And he even starts to kind of elaborate on why the Germans are in an even better position to seize power as a communist force than Russia was when it seized power in 1917. Russia had 8 to 10 million workers, whereas Germany had 20 million out of 60 million. I don't know if those statistics are accurate. I'm skeptical, of course, but for the sake of propaganda, it works very well, which that's 1/3 of the German population is working class, according to Zinoviev. He says the German workers are literate. They have magnificent organization. Their organizational skills are magnificent. They're cultured. Wow, they're cultured. Interesting. A high proportion of them served in the army during the imperialist war. Okay. It's just so weird to see the Russians praising the Germans so much. They call them Niemcy. I don't know if you know that. Their word for Germans are Niemiec, which means can't talk. So they actually have a strained relationship with Germans.
That's really interesting. I also,
Yeah.
and for those listening in, I'm nowhere near as facile as a Russian speaker as my guest here, but I did grow up speaking it, and I did not know that that was the origin of Niemiec.
Yeah.
That's remarkable. My working knowledge of my own language is very much like, yeah, maybe call it baby Russian. But anyhow,
Yeah.
that's an interesting note. I also like that you
Yeah.
say Lenin.
Lenin, Zinoviev, Trotsky, you know, all these guys.
Stalin.
Kalantai, don't forget.
Oh, of course.
I want to do a video on Kalantai in New Jersey because she lived in Passaic for a while, and I grew up near Passaic. So, anyway,
I'm from Portland, where John Reed and his partner are from. John Reed, for those listening, was an American journalist who was present for a significant. Oh, yeah, there it is. A significant portion of the Russian Revolution. He was in, I believe, mostly in Petersburg now.
Yes.
Yeah. Anyway, definitely worth reading his book. It's absolutely essential.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry, didn't mean to derail your subject.
That's all right. That was very interesting. Okay. So this is where it gets a little more complicated and starting to get out of the realm of what I'm fully competent in, but I will do my best because he starts actually talking about the actual dynamics of the revolution. I haven't been following along on that, so I'm not totally sure, but I'll do my best. Let's see. So in the third letter that's here, Zinoviev talks about the ways that the German Revolution could learn from the mistakes of the Russian Revolution, which is interesting because that's what we're here to do right now, right?
Yeah.
So they were also, just like us, discussing what can we learn. It must not, from the first moment, forget the alliance between town and country, and that it was the revolutionary period, the early revolutionary period for Russia. It was hard to create that kind of an alliance. There was a lot of different factions and resistance.
Very suspicious peasantry.
Yeah, and I don't blame them, to be honest. I mean,
yeah.
They're like, "Hey, we're communists. We're going to fix everything." It's like, okay.
I think also there was that passage that I'm recalling from China Mieville's book, October, where this is in the before the Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks, the RSDLP came around, the kind of various Narodnik groups, the populist activist types who would go out into the countryside, and they were not welcome. They were often handed over to the authorities by the very people they were trying to like preach to, I suppose.
Yeah, I can totally imagine that happening. For sure. The situation is insane. I mean, you read about the Russian Revolution, it's like, that is hardcore.
Yeah.
Wow.
Also, I mean, I think this is another. Another theme that keeps coming up throughout. I think this actually may be a good tangent here, which is and I think Axel, you can probably speak to this as well, which is the radically different conditions of the case of Germany, with the socialist movement being very, very much above ground and legal, versus in Russia, where for a large part of its existence, the Russian socialist movement was basically illegal, effectively. Trade unions were very restricted, if not, I think, illegal in some cases. And
Absolutely.
yeah, yeah, there's a critique of legalism and coloring too neatly between the lines, and I think that and I think Broué gets into this in the last couple of chapters of this book, where he's got a chapter called "Grafting Russia onto German Conditions" or something like that, and I think that. And at least this is at least my reading of it, at least from Zinoviev's quotations that are in the readings that we did, which is that there was, I think, kind of an overestimation of the political consciousness and like militancy of the German working class on their part, and like perhaps that was colored by the fact that the Russian movement had been so like well versed in both like legal and illegal tactics. And I think the fact that this is just my reading of it. I could be very wrong here, but
Absolutely.
my interpretation is that essentially the German movement was perhaps more conservativized by its legality, and the kind of organizational norms and things that other sociological consequences that flowed from that also had a political impact. Anyhow, that's
absolutely
my comment.
There's another thing that one should not underestimate, and that is the significance of regionalism in Germany, because Germany didn't exist as a nation state until 1871. And even with the creation of the German Empire, there still was within the empire the Kingdom of Bavaria, the Kingdom of Württemberg, the Kingdom of Saxony, the Kingdom of Prussia, and countless grand duchies. So it makes a big difference whether you're talking about Baden in southwestern Germany or Mecklenburg in northern central Germany, in terms of the local traditions, the regional traditions, the mentality of the subcultures that have developed there. So while, there is a German working class in general, in some ways there are different German working classes as well. So I think it's as I said, it's very important to not overlook the huge differences that make Germany different from Russia, but also different from France. And Broué, of course, has probably more of a French-Belgian perspective on these things, even though he knows a great deal about Germany as well. And the way Germany is still, not doesn't have the same tradition of a centralized state that existed in Russia and in France and other places.
Yeah, so I actually just put a big map of the different German regions in that era. I think this is from Wikipedia, so it could be a little dubious, but I think these are generally pretty reliable. But yeah, I think that's something that
Russia also had sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Right.
I was just thinking that Russia had that Russia was connected to parts of Germany by royal marriage too, up until the end of the Romanov dynasty.
Right.
So
her name is escaping me right now.
Catherine the Second.
Yes, Catherine II was from Holstein.
Tsar Nicholas's wife, wasn't
Untitled Chapter. Yeah, her husband was from Holstein. Yeah.
Right.
Peter,
right.
But,
Alexandra. No, is that right? No.
Yeah, she was from Hesse, and Nicholas' wife. Yes. The Romanov, like so many other European royals, they have lots of German connections.
Right. And it's interesting to hear you say that, Professor Axel Fair-Schulz, because I didn't think of this before, but now I'm thinking about it. Zinoviev constantly refers to the German proletariat as this one mass of people. I don't know. What's your feelings about that?
Yeah. It's, I mean, on the one hand, it's definitely more true in 1922, 1923 than in 1871. But at the same time, there's still these huge differences in mentality between the West, the Southwest, and Bavaria, and confessional differences too between Protestants and Catholics. And they're not sectarian religious differences, but they're deep cultural differences.
Yeah.
Because being a Catholic, I mean, it's also linked to political history, as when Germany was united, Bismarck engaged in what is known as negative integration, where he targeted certain groups and labeled them enemies of the nation. socialists at the end, but liberals and Catholics. So there's a long history of Catholic separateness in Germany, and even a very separate Catholic labor movement. While there is, the union movement, the Catholics had their own unions for a long time, and those were, of course, things that Barbiev overlooked, either because he didn't know or because it did not really fit into what he wanted to bring across with his political agitation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
A lot of this calls to mind the national question during the Russian Revolution, because I think there's the Russian proletariat, Russia with a capital R, proletariat, was minuscule compared to the proportions of other national groups and peasants and whatnot throughout the soon-to-be former empire. So that's honestly, I think that makes the Russian Revolution all the more remarkable for what it ended up being. But I think that
Absolutely.
another thing that this is something that I have been thinking about a lot, which is that Marx and Engels had always kind of, I guess, predicted that proletarian revolution would happen kind of first in the big industrial centers, because that's where there's a big working class that's organized and cultured and has technical skills and blah blah blah, all these abilities to self-organize, and they're thrown into huge urban centers and blah blah blah. I think this is more or less kind of their justification for that kind of geopolitical analysis. I think but I think both from the kind of dynamics of this German Revolution that we're talking about, and through the revolutions in Russia and later in China and elsewhere in the colonized world, that these revolutions are really centered where capitalism is like far less developed, and there's, like, in Russia, for example, a very kind of historically nascent bourgeoisie. It's not nearly as historically developed as, say, the German bourgeoisie. There's just a level of developmental difference there that I think made, I can't remember who I'm quoting here, but the weakest link in the chain, I think this may be a Lenin quote, that Russia ended, because of this, that Russia ended up being the weakest link in the imperialist chain. Anyhow, I think that's an interesting kind of reversal of where Marxian theories of revolution, world revolution, kind of diverged from maybe what was initially anticipated through that analysis. Feel free to
even though Marx himself at the end of his life became more interested in Russia and considered the possibility of a separate Russian path to socialism, and this notion of revolutions perhaps not just breaking out in the center of capitalism, but on the periphery as well. So as Marx developed his ideas more, he became less committed to this statist idea, that everyone in the world, all regions of the world, have to follow the same pattern.
Right. And I think that's
And he wrote about Russia. Yeah.
that's exactly what Leon Trotsky gets to in his theory of uneven and combined development as a
Yeah.
theory of geopolitical and economic development, which is that the essentials of it are basically, for those tuning in, this is Trotsky develops this idea of uneven and combined development, which is that basically more industrialized countries and more like I hate the framing, but it's like it's the language that I have that we have for it, which is like underdeveloped, industrially underdeveloped countries have this kind of coexistence and power dynamic, and that like when, for example, heavy industry gets introduced to a country where they didn't first follow the stages of like small handicraft and manufacturing on into and later into heavy industry, where that has been kind of forced by either from outside forces on them or what have you, that these things can coexist, and that like you can have like for example in the case of Russia, for the most part very rural and peasant-based economy that's still living under the vestiges of a feudal system. I mean, despite in I think 1861 Tsar Alexander the Second liberated the serfs,
Yeah.
but Russia remained that whole empire remained very much in the clutches of a kind of a semi-feudal economy. But Trotsky's point in the theory of uneven and combined development is that these things can happen, and that the trajectory of industrialization or lack thereof in countries all over the world doesn't necessarily need to follow this linear trajectory that, say, for example, that England followed. Anyhow, I forgot where I was going with that. Uneven combined development. That's a whole interesting topic that maybe I should make a whole video about. It's a very interesting idea that I think doesn't get enough attention. I think it's less politically relevant now than it was in Trotsky's time, but I do think it's an interesting lens to examine. I think at least the turn of the 20th century. But I could be wrong about that. I'm not a historian. I'm a physicist with a very passionate interest in history. But anyhow, that's catching myself rambling. So maybe we should get back on track here.
Okay. So next, the author goes on to discuss the legend of collusion with the Nazis. And it first talks about this social democratic press, which I didn't fully understand what was meant by social democratic press. So if somebody has a good description of what that entailed, that would help me a bit. Does anyone does either the professor or Melody have a good description of that?
Can you say it again? You were cutting out a little bit.
Okay. Am I not cutting out now?
I can hear you now. Yes.
Okay, great. So I was just wondering if somebody... I was wondering if somebody could explain what the social democratic press entailed exactly. Who was the social democratic press?
The social democratic press?
Yeah, this is where it kind of starts from. So I'm thinking, is he talking about the press of that was supportive of the German social democratic government.
I think he's talking pretty explicitly about the like primarily the organ of the Social Democratic Party, the SPD. He's talking, I think, mostly about the newspaper called Vorwärts. Is that correct,
Oh,
Axel?
but he does mention the world across the world. He mentions British papers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that,
So,
and Axel, feel free to correct me on this, but I think the implication there being, at least in the case of Germany, that it refers explicitly to the SPD's newspapers,
okay.
Vorwärts in particular, and I think abroad in terms of
hmm
like maybe kind of the parties that are still associated with the Second International,
Yeah. Okay.
such as
Gotcha.
And it's important to realize just how entrenched and elaborate and powerful the SPD has been. In 1912, the SPD became the largest single party in Germany. And even before 1912, the SPD owned hundreds of newspapers, Leipziger Volkszeitung. So it's a real universe of almost a real infrastructure of newspapers, magazines, political journals, and so on and so forth, and linked also with sports clubs, football teams. So it's a real. There's a very nice book by Vernon Littke called Alternative Culture, which really looks at the social democratic cultural world, including the newspapers, as sort of a state within the state. So they had a huge amount of influence.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you for that. So it does seem sort of like Zinoviev is critiquing what would be a mainstream press organ, the way that he crafts this critique. So there's, I guess, in the social democratic press, there was a certain amount of talk that the communists were colluding with the nationalists of Germany, with the fascists. And of course, anyone who's followed left-wing politics knows that if you're a left-winger, accusations of fascism will come your way at some point. So this was sort of like the social democratic press trying to stoke what Zinoviev feels is a conspiratorial story, a fake news, if you will, that the communists and the fascists are in league somehow. And he says that the reason they're doing this is because that France is going to take over the situation. France is going to attack Germany, and this is going to be the Social Democrats' explanation for why France attacked them. They'll say, those communists and fascists were, palling around with each other, and they left their country vulnerable for France. Is what I guess Zinoviev is getting here. Yeah,
and I think I don't want to be too transhistorical here, but I am looking for some shorthand, and I think maybe what the SPD was, doing and trying to associate the KPD with the Nazis was basically horseshoe theory in some regard.
Yeah.
I mean, I think again, like this is maybe a bit of a reach, and I think we need to be very careful when using kind of more modern, historic, modern, you know, ideological framing to talk about old ideological debates. So, like, because I think there's kind of a tension wherein, we need ready to hand language that doesn't require everyone to have been, read, all have a PhD in history and political theory, right? But at the same time, like we want to be accurate and not transhistoricize things that shouldn't be transhistoricized. And I always find that it's often difficult to get that right, to both use.
But you're essentially correct. Just to situate the Social Democratic Party, the SPD was the core part of the so-called Weimar Coalition. The Weimar Coalition is this formation of political parties that really were committed to the Weimar Republic, to parliamentary bourgeois democracy. So it was the SPD and then the small liberal party, the DDP, which started out at the beginning of the Weimar Republic, having about 15% of the vote, and at the end of the Republic in 1933, they had less than 3% of the vote. And then there was the Center Party, which is sort of part of the Weimar Coalition, the Catholic Center Party, which is sort of a moderate conservative party. And the Communist Party wanted to transcend the Weimar Republic in terms of building a socialist Soviet republic. The Nazis wanted to transcend the republic by building a right-wing fascist dictatorship. So in that sense, the Social Democrats saw them both as a threat to the republic on the left and a threat to the republic on the right.
Yeah. I think another element here is the relationship that, for example, the Social Democrats have with Soviet Russia, which is, I think there's a very interesting, I don't want to get into it right now because I don't have all my documents fast to hand, but there is a very interesting exchange of polemics to read between, among others, Lenin and Kautsky. There's Kautsky writes a piece that I think is called Democracy and Dictatorship, in which he more or less condemns the Bolsheviks during the height of the Civil War for, extraordinary measures and blah, blah, blah. This isn't socialism, this is dictatorship, blah, blah, blah. And Lenin writes a defense of the, harsh measures that they're taking called the Proletarian Revolution and the Renegade Kautsky. I'm very much ironically paraphrasing Lenin here, where he says, basically, listen here, you little shit. You have no idea what we're dealing with, and you long ago gave up on the idea of, revolutionary socialism. So why don't you take a fucking seat, buddy? This is me engaging in a bit of caricature, also because I haven't read that pamphlet in a long time, but I place it somewhere really up high on the things that you should read if you're interested in Lenin, right up there next to The State and Revolution and Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism. It's called The Proletarian Revolution and the Renegade Kautsky, and I'm going to link that in the chat because I think it's such a valuable historical document to go through. And it is absolutely exposes the kind of the differences between that had been kind of visible since the outbreak of World War I in the international socialist movement, but really come into kind of really painful view in the course of, among other things, the German Revolution here, in which this divide between those who essentially want to preserve the old order and people who are genuinely interested in revolution and the overturn of the existing capitalist society really becomes clear what the where those lines of cleavage are.
Yeah. And it's interesting because a lot of the rhetoric of the Soviet Union with regards to what's going on in Germany, to put it delicately, opens them to the charge of being having some parity with fascism, because it's very similar to the fascist rhetoric. That's why the Nazis, they call themselves the National Socialists. They're trying to appeal to the same type of person that the communists are trying to appeal to, the same class of person, the working class. But I guess the fascists try to appeal to them in a much more like masculinist sort of culture war level. And the communists try to appeal to them on a let's organize and like take control of the slave factories we work in and the society that, rips us off forever.
I think I want to, and Axel, perhaps you might be the better person to answer this here, but I think I'm not incorrect in pointing that the people who the fascists, the Nazis were appealing to were primarily of the kind of petty bourgeoisie and the kind of downwardly mobile, the new kind of freshly disfranchised middle class. I think, and I think there's resonance in current, fascist movements wherein, the sense that, we need to go back to the old ways because, back in the day, we were the empowered class, we were the enfranchised class, and we need to turn back the clock and get rid of these degenerates or political agitators, etc. I think that's a common thread throughout all or most fascistic movements, and I think that the class character also, again, it's not that people from the working and class and kind of lumpen proletariat aren't at all involved. It's just I don't think that it would be accurate to say that they were the target audience, so to speak. And Oxford,
Absolutely, yes.
Am I talking nonsense?
So it's people who were afraid of. Absolutely correct. People who were afraid of being proletarianized, who had resentments against, the big bourgeoisie, the big department store owners. So it's the big capitalists. It's the small shop owners, small business people, and so on and so forth. It's also important to point out that the term socialism was shared once upon a time across the political spectrum.
Right.
There was a phenomenon in the 19th century known as Prussian Socialism, which essentially is a current of Prussian conservatives, essentially Prussian aristocrats. So it's a phenomenon on the right. And in Austria, at the turn of the century, there was a group of people led by Georg von Schönere, known as the Christian Socialist movement, and they were right-wingers as well. So today, of course, we associate the phrase socialism exclusively with the left. But one of the reasons why Marx called the Communist Manifesto the Communist Manifesto is because so many different groups claimed the label socialist. Many of them on the left, most of them on the left, but some were on the right as well. So it's not such a surprise that the Nazis would use the name socialist, National Socialist, for their movement as well. They were not the first right-wingers to do that. I mean, there is a right-wing critique of capitalism, even though they defend capitalism. They just want, a kind of capitalism without class struggle. But
and,
the other interesting thing is there have been many detailed studies of what sorts of people actually joined the Nazi Party in terms of Nazi Party membership records. And one group that is most prominent among the Nazi Party membership is physicians. And physicians are definitely not working class people.
I don't like the sound of a Nazi doctor, to tell you the truth.
No one should. But physicians were drawn in fairly large numbers to the Nazi movement.
Yeah, I think that what you just said, Axel, there recalls for me something that the German socialist August Bebel called. He recalled that he said, fascism is the socialism of fools, or something to that effect. Or anti-Semitism is the socialism of fools.
Anti-Semitism,
I think that is essentially, that also is another ideological resonance throughout different fascist movements across history. The late Marxist philosopher Moishe Postone has said something to the effect of fascism is the fusion of the apparently revolutionary with the deeply reactionary. It is, it's kind of like, I think of, all the like Illuminati conspiracy theories are all have that kind of common thread through them, which is that things were good in our society until the corruptions of the Jews or the whatever. It could be substitute in lizard people or whatever, some kind of foreign element,
some kind of outsider, upset
exactly.
the system.
Right, some kind of something, absolutely. And that it nevertheless has this character, like it dresses in some superficially, left-ish clothing, like for example, National Socialist, right? They had a red flag and everything because the workers' movement and the socialist movement in Germany had such power, and I think it's fair to say, and this is what we've kind of discovered through the study of the German Revolution in this study group, is that the German working class, everyone and their mom, is right up until the turn of the World War. What's up? Sorry.
I apologize. I thought it cut out for a second, so I was filling the space. But you go ahead and finish.
It's okay. It was right up until kind of the turn of the outbreak of the World War and later humiliations, that kind of everyone and their mom was involved with the SPD or adjacent to it in some way. There were social clubs and sports associations and all huge sweeping facets of cultural life that were colored by the socialist movement, the SPD and later other parties as well. But Axel, is that am I talking nonsense, or is that?
Oh, you're correct, absolutely. And another person who comes to mind who is sort of a right winger using the rhetoric of the left and of socialism is Eugen Düring. Engels polemicized against Eugen Düring in his famous book, Mr. Eugen Düring's Transformation of Science. He was a university professor, an economics professor in Berlin, and tried to combine aspects of socialism with conspiracy theories and large amount of anti-Semitism. He is one of the reasons why August Bebel said anti-Semitism is the socialism of fools. So, yeah, the right wing has mimicked some leftist ideas, but combined them with nationalism, folkish nationalism, and all sorts of other things in a very toxic mix.
Yeah, and I do notice that that both the communists and the fascists want to address the fact that Germany had been was essentially a defeated country that was under the foot of the Entente, that was chained to reparations. But as you put it, the way that the economic collapse affected different strata of people. You said the petty bourgeois people who were sort of downwardly mobile and experiencing anxiety and looking for something more extreme to like protect their interests, versus the working classes who the communists are trying to empower to take control of the situation. So that's interesting. And Zinoviev definitely talks about that a lot, about the same kind of things, the same kind of problems that the Nazis are talking about. And that might be why the social democratic press is so quick to link the two, or finds it easy to link the two in the press, where most people reading it are not thinking about the distinction between the petty bourgeoisie and the working class. And so they can imagine the Nazis and the communists sort of paint them with a broad brush.
For people who, and I think this is something that I do think very much applies to our own time, is that for people who are not attuned to those fine, not so fine-grained distinctions, but at the same time, who don't have a certain level of political consciousness, I think there is kind of a temptation to, equate the sort of I'm not sure how to put it. It's my way of coming back to horseshoe theory, in that to people who are not necessarily super politically attuned, that anyone offering big sweeping solutions kind of sounds like they're speaking the same language.
Right.
But I do think that, and this is what I think we're coming to understand through the study group, is that that's totally false. And the communists were by no means perfect, certainly, but I think they were far more not that being better than the Nazis is a particularly high bar, but definitely I think they have real solutions, as opposed to the Nazis having so-called solutions which involve, doing a genocide and liquidating political opponents, on the basis of basically reestablishing the old order, which I think it really is what's at the core of fascism, is the masquerading of kind of mass action and militancy, but really it is an appeal to the past, an appeal to existing authority, and the kind of illusion that
Illusion.
Yeah, the illusion.
That's a good word. That's a good word.
Of a lost past, and I think and I was mentioning this in the chat, to our chat, which is that the sense that, like, for example, I think it's very acute in the United States, where the white middle class has been historically very enfranchised, vis-a-vis settler colonialism and institutional racism, that the fear of proletarianization among middle class whites in the United States is also compounded and amplified by racism, and that is what makes the particular form of fascism that we face in the United States, where maybe you want to call it settler fascism or something like that. The elevation,
Yep.
I think maybe quoting Brianna can remind me who I'm quoting, if it's Fanon or someone else, of fascism being the extension of colonial methods to the previously enfranchised classes of imperial society. I think that that's an apt description of fascism, at least in our current context in the United States. Feel free to push back on that. I'm barely developing these ideas.
Well, I think that's what we're seeing in places like Portland, in terms of, the militarized police being used. We have seen these forms of violence on the border. We have seen them in areas victimized by imperialism, by US imperialism, but now it is increasingly used within the United States as well.
Yeah, and I think the last time that any kind of major there was any kind the military, domestic military deployment on this scale, I would say it was probably 1877, in response to the general strike that was fueled by the railroad industry going on strike here. It was the first time that I think the army was actually deployed to put down a domestic rebellion. And this is, by the way, the army fresh off of their latest, genociding of indigenous peoples. This is in the 1870s, so Western expansion is in full swing. Again, not to speak flippantly of any of this, because it's incredibly tragic. Cesare, that's who the discourse on colonialism, as Brianna just pointed out, that's who I was paraphrasing, quoting, I guess, about the extension of colonial logic to the previously enfranchised. That was Aimé Cesare. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Sorry, folks.
All right.
Coming back briefly to the situation in Germany, it is particularly galling to realize that the attacks on part of the SPD on the KPD, saying the KPD mirrors extremism, like the extremism of fascism. It is very galling, because the SPD actually has enabled right-wing forces, including fascist forces. In 1918, it was President Ebert who made a deal with General Wilhelm Groener, essentially saying, we will not touch the army establishment. We will not touch the entire judicial apparatus. We will not touch the entire state apparatus, what we would call today the deep state. And all these institutions continue to exist in Weimar Germany, and they never ever reconcile themselves even to a limited parliamentary bourgeois democracy. And eventually they played a key role in forging an alliance with the Nazis, not just in 1933, but as early as the early 1920s. 1920s. It was, after all, Ludendorff, who didn't spend a single day in prison, who forged this alliance with Hitler. And I mean, he was involved in an attempt to overthrow the Republic, and they put Hitler in jail for a year. Very light sentence. Ludendorff didn't get any sentences. And even Wilhelm Kuno, who was appointed by Ebert as chancellor, no one ever elected him. Later on, he became one of the economic advisors to Hitler. So here we have people who see themselves as apolitical technocrats who have played a key role in bringing fascism to power. So the rise of fascism is something that was propelled from the very center of German politics, not just the periphery.
Right, and I think that we see in what you just described kind of the ideological outline of what's now kind of known as the Nuremberg defense of I was just following orders, right? This bureaucratism and kind of routinism of the form of so-called, the so-called apolitical people, or
Yes.
technocrats and so on, which is to say that it has, they may think of themselves as apolitical, but the reality is that they're enabling the political right through their complicity. If I can't speak to their psychology in terms of what they think their true convictions are or whatever, but right, maybe this is Asada Shakur I'm quoting now. I'm not sure. I have a lot of quotes that I pull from my strange little brain, which is neutrality is in the struggle for liberation. Neutrality is to side with the oppressor. I think that I can't remember who said that. Maybe is that Angela Davis or something. I'm so sorry. My memory for associating quotes with names is very poor.
No, but it's interesting to hear you talk about the Social Democrats who stayed on, the Democrats who continued to serve. I mean, we have, I guess you could say we have those in the United States as well. People who, I will serve in the Trump administration to, I'm apolitical, or I'm going to be the adult in the room, is what we get a lot of. And we have a lot of crossovers between administrations too. I mean, President Obama hired a fair share of Republicans as well to assist him. Yeah, exactly. But I did think it was interesting that from that perspective, Zinoviev sort of crafts this scenario whereby, talking about regionalism again, which was the place where I guess the KPD was doing really well in Saxony and had taken power to a certain degree there, right? Entrenched themselves to some degree. And
with the KPD and the SPD form a coalition government there. Is that correct, Axel?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's in Saxony and in Thuringia too.
Okay.
Okay. So he mentioned Saxon specifically here, and his construction is basically that, with the communists in power in this region taking the territory, it's sort of like it'll expose the Social Democrats when they attempt to clamp down or repress the workers' movement. Like, it'll show, and it'll break the workers of their illusions that the social democracy is the way to go, that the social democracy has something to offer them. And he says that basically they're sort of buttressed by the fact that for a while now, the communists, the KPD, and these groups have been taking over have been gaining influence in the factory councils and in other committees. So they're kind of he's saying on the ground level they have a strong foundation, and when the Social Democrats expose themselves by trying to repress what's going on in Saxon, for example, that will be just one of quite a few things that Zinoviev believes will break the working class's illusory devotion to social democratic politics.
Yeah, I think that those illusions, though, like I think are very, like, you know, are very real. They're not, which is to say, I think that they're informed by the real involvement of the mass of people with the movement. And I think uh, you know, the history of the SPD itself, splitting first into the independent Social Democrats, the SPD, and then later the USPD, and then later the split between the USPD and the KPD, what would become the KPD.
Right.
I think, like, these illusions are lingering things that are as much a product of the tensions within these different political groupings as they are, and it's, because if the workers movement, the social democratic movement, had been, such a huge widespread phenomenon for so long, that I think it'd be a bit hard not to have some illusions about it. It's like, if you've ever been involved in an organization, or even like something like maybe even a band or something, and you've been kind of drawn into the idea that you're gonna last forever, or you're gonna sell a million copies of your next CD or something, that illusion might actually be have some grain of truth to it, supported by some undergirding grain of truth. Like, well, your last album sold, 1,000 or 2,000 copies, and you seem to be getting really popular now. So if you sold 1 million copies on your next album, it might not be such an illusion after all. Right? I think maybe this is maybe a bit of a stretch in terms of analogy, but I think that those kind of illusions exist in social life for very real reasons.
Yeah. It does feel like, just from the way that Zinoviev views it, that he may have benefited from hearing you tell him that.
I mean, I think
Sure.
Zinoviev is acutely aware of this. I think he
Oh,
is. But I think
okay.
Zinoviev is not without illusions of his own, which are, I
Yeah.
think, partially distortions of space and time. Uh, by that I mean, it's hard for Moscow to see every little thing that's going on in Saxony and Prussia and whatnot. And I think that that's another kind of recurring theme throughout this book, is this uh, relationship between Moscow and the Germans, which is that
Mhm.
they command a lot of respect and credibility, um, and they are trying very earnestly to help them out. They want them to win. They desperately want Germany to win. In Lenin's own words, that he's been saying since I think as early as like the mid 19 teens, he had said, "Without Germany, we are lost." Um, you know,
Right.
so this is a very common thought, not just in Lenin, but throughout the whole kind of Russian movement. They were acutely aware of the problem of, if we are isolated in our seizure of power, we are going to have a really hard time. And they were absolutely correct about that. But anyhow, I think that Zinoviev, for a variety of reasons, has kind of perhaps put too many chips on the table, so to speak, because of you know, what they wanted to believe, right? And I think there's a tendency, and we all have it, is to find facts that suit our theories rather than having adequate theories to suit the existing facts, right? So there's, if we desperately want a revolution to happen, we may be, reading in, over amplifying objective factors that may not be actually as important as we think they are to kind of serve that agenda, so to speak, which, as many of these revolutionary movements across the world have discovered, that tension, which is a fundamental problem of Marxism as a self-proclaimed scientific methodology, which is to say, maybe I'm getting really off track here, but how do you kind of check yourself on that without getting too carried away in the subjective moment of here's how things seem to be going. Here are the objective factors that we're analyzing that seem to be pushing things in a particular direction. But how do we keep reflecting and alleviate, I won't say solve, but alleviate the tension between theory and praxis there. Where are we landing in terms of in terms of that? So I think that's a very profound philosophical and practical political problem for Marxists to this day. I think across time and space for all revolutionaries, but I think specifically within the framework of Marxism, which is something that I very proudly adhere to. It's not infallible, no, and it shouldn't claim to be. And I think that's you can definitely get a little bit too big for your britches in that way.
Definitely. All right. So so it is difficult to get your mind fully around where how difficult or how likely, like, Zinoviev is printing in Pravda, so he's like you say, he's doing the very extremely hopeful thing. And I mean, I can remember being extremely hopeful and feeling confident that Bernie Sanders would win, and then only to have him get really quickly ushered out of the race. So I definitely, there must have been something we were not paying attention to there, but we didn't really see it at the time. So I have that in common with Zinoviev.
Yeah, can definitely be easy to get carried away if either things are going extremely well or extremely poorly.
But it seems like he feels like that by comparison to Russia, that Germany has a much stronger foundation overall, not just to achieve the revolution, but to do the difficult work that comes after achieving the seizure of power, which is actually trying to attempt to build communism and stabilize your country and protect yourself from invasions and all the things that come with being a country.
Yeah, the complications of statecraft.
Yeah.
Statecraft and
for
geopolitics.
Sure. Yeah.
You're going to get a crash course on that real quick as soon as you take power, because that's the battlefield that you're forced onto, whether you like it or not.
That's for sure. And Zinoviev goes into, he's basically like, here's what's going to happen to you at day 2. Day 1 will be fun, but day 2, which day 1 was by no means guaranteed, as we know.
Right.
But yeah, he was already saying like, get ready for day 2, which is shortage of coal, difficulties with industry, unemployment, and the agitation of counter-revolutionary elements, wrestling with financial difficulties inherited from the economy of capitalist Germany. He said they might have to make a deal with France for some supplies, heavy industry supplies, because that they might have to do that to survive. And he reminds them about the NEP a little bit, to say that you might have to be more pragmatic than pure Marxism necessarily outlines, so to speak.
It's remarkable that Zinoviev did not anticipate, if there had been a successful German Revolution, that France and Britain, and potentially the United States too, but definitely France and Britain, would have invaded. I mean, France and
Right.
Belgium invaded the Rhineland, just because of the reparations schedule.
Yeah.
So then they would have seen a revolution as a direct threat. And I mean, in 1917, the situation was very different. The war was still going on. The Central Powers were in between, but they still, did what they could to make things very difficult, including eventually directly interfering as well. So it seems to me as if the Bolsheviks, and I'm curious about that, did any, in what you have read, any of the Bolsheviks not consider that the Western imperialist powers would act like imperialist powers and intervene?
I to be honest with you, the only person I found who might have expressed those sentiments and those thoughts was Stalin. Actually,
I actually tend to agree with that. I think that especially given the horrific experience of the Russian Civil War and the Entente powers piling in support of the whites, I think they're the Bolsheviks generally, but I think Stalin expressed this. I can't. There's a letter that I'm trying to recall offhand, but I can't. That basically Germany is going to be facing the same problems. God, this is really bothering me because now I think it's in some collected works or article somewhere that I need to dig up. Anyway, sorry guys.
I saw something where he mentioned France, the threat of France invading at some point.
Yeah, I think I'm also maybe recalling from his Foundations of Leninism something, but I can't remember offhand. Well,
Stalin was a true Tsar. Yeah. There's just a few more things on that I can add, but that pretty much wraps it up. I'll just mention that other problems that they were going to have to face was they were going to have to start their revolution, as we said, in the middle of Europe when the war had not divided the continent up into different blocks and there wasn't massive, insane fighting. Well, there was, obviously. The imperialist powers were not fighting each other. And they were going to be in the middle trying to start a communist revolution, which was a much less advantageous position than being in Russia.
A pretty dicey proposition no matter where you are, but especially if you're in the middle of imperialist Europe.
Absolutely. And that counter-revolution was always going to be a problem, or at least for a long time it was going to be a problem. And here's another one. I thought this was interesting. Proletarian Germany could not exclude in advance the possibility of being forced to sign a treaty along the lines of that signed at Brest-Litovsk.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's not a good. You don't want to see that.
Gosh darn geopolitics making everything complicated.
Well, that's why Stalin understood it better, because I think he had a more like Rooseveltian. He not Rooseveltian, but like he was the guy that went to Yalta. So I mean, he was very astute with geopolitics. You know, he was very interested in it, I think. But that's about it.
Yeah, so I'm going to do my best with chapters 41 and 42, because the people who volunteered to come on and summarize them had, unfortunately, other things pop up for them at the last minute. So my summaries are going to be pretty general and maybe not very good, but that's that's how the cookie crumbles sometimes.
Sorry, Melody, just real quick.
Please.
Sorry, I am gonna have to at 8:30. I have to drop off, which is in a couple of minutes. So maybe I should say ta-ta for now to the chat and everybody.
Yeah, please. If you have to head
Thanks
out,
so much for having.
Yeah, if you have to head out, please do plug yourself, plug your channel. Absolutely welcome to put a link to it in the chat before you head off. Thanks so much for doing this work, for coming on with us. We're gonna be finishing this book probably in the next 2 weeks, because there's only a couple chapters left. And we may do other books in the future, maybe something a little bit more fun, a little bit less academic. We have all kinds of other options available to us. So if you're ever interested in coming on again with us, or other folks as well, other folks who might find this kind of thing fun or interesting, feel free to get them in touch with me. But yeah, go ahead and plug yourself, and yeah, we'll see you next time or some other time.
All right. Well, thank you, Melody, so much for inviting me to come on here, and thank you, Professor Axel Fair-Schulz. I learned a lot of things from both of you. This, as I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, sorry, I'm like performing now. At the beginning of the live stream, that I was not well versed in this topic. So I'm really glad that I was able to sharpen some dull edges in understanding what was going on. And I would love to come back anytime and do this again. My channel is called Queer POTUS, and it's on YouTube. I'll put it in the chat in just a sec. As soon as I duck out, I'll put it in the chat. Queer POTUS. I'm on Twitch as well. And yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, take care. Have a nice day. Stay safe.
Great. Bye.
Yeah. Bye. Tschüss.
Yeah, and I do like to keep these streams kind of close to the 2-hour mark. So we will wrap up pretty soon. Unfortunately, Izzy seems to have disappeared as well. So I'm doing my best working with what I got. So I just wanted to take a moment to actually plug my own channel here. I'm gonna switch over to my support the show card. If you like what my channel does, and you want to see us do more, head over to my Patreon at patreon.com/aworldtowin and support the show financially. Any small amount helps us get things like better equipment, more books, all that kind of stuff. I'm a trans woman trying to survive under capitalism, so I'm doing my best here. But yeah, if you can't support the show financially, make sure to follow me on Twitter at worldtowin1. Make sure to like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to my channel, and share it with your friends and comrades. And the other thing that I wanted to just note real quick is that if you ever want to do your own study group on this book. I want these videos will be archived on my channel so that you can use them as a teaching resource in the future. Right? So, trying to introduce this to students or fellow comrades in the movement. Have a handy way to do that. Anyway, so that's my quick intermission to talk about how you can support our show. So essentially, in chapters 41 and 42 are describing the conditions of the almost insurrection that they prepared for and then did not ultimately come to fruition. I am going to have to lean on reading from the book a bit, unfortunately, just because again, the folks who offered to summarize couldn't show up. So essentially, this is on page 805 for those who want to follow along. The conference at Chemnitz, Rote Sturmfahne, the red battle flag, I think, red storm flag, is that right, Axel?
Yes.
All right. Reported on the 15th and 17th of October on the negotiations which had been proceeding for over a week in Berlin regarding the formation of a joint action committee of the organizations of the SPD, KPD, and the trade unions in the capital. In Moscow, Zinoviev wrote that that he hoped to receive at any moment the news that this agreement had been concluded, as it obviously would have a nationwide impact and significance. In Die Rote Fahne, the red flag, which is the KPD's newspaper, I believe, yeah.
Yes.
Which had now reappeared. It had been banned on and off for the last little while in different parts of the country. Brandler declared the German working people would not let the Saxon proletariat be attacked. He ended, quote, "Now everything is ready." However, the Reichswehr had just set the date which he had refused to fix himself, the date for the decisive confrontation. As the historian E.H. Carr remarks, quote, "It had fixed the date on which the communists must either act or confess their impotence." On the 20th of October, the Revcom, the Revolutionary Committee, met in secrecy in Dresden. Despite the news which it had just received that some important arms stores in Berlin had been discovered by the authorities, it did not regard the situation as serious. Everything was in hand for the insurrection to develop as expected from the 23rd onwards. However, it was necessary that before that date, the Saxon proletariat should appeal to the workers of Germany for help. The Revcom decided that the armed uprising should be throughout the country with a general strike for which the call would be issued as the communists proposed from the conference of the factory councils called for on the 21st of October, the very next day in Chemnitz, to discuss the economic situation and social problems. Early in the morning on the 22nd of October, the KPD district secretaries from the entire country met Brandler, Bocher, is that right?
Yes.
And Tekert. The representatives of the Revcom revealed their plan. Very soon, at the suggestion of Brandler, the conference of the factory councils would issue a call for a general strike to defend proletarian Saxony and its workers' government against the Reichswehr. The Reichswehr is the army. That's right, yeah?
Yes.
On Monday, and contextually here, I think by now the government has declared an end to the policy of passive resistance against the occupation of the Ruhr. Am I getting the chronology right here?
Yeah, correct.
All right, cool. Okay.
I think at the end of the book there is a chronology, highlighting events in Germany, events within the Comintern, events within the revolutionary movement in Germany, and so on and so forth. And that's really helpful to get a sense of what's going on, because it can be very confusing otherwise.
So yeah, I actually have that entire chronology. I printed it out on my computer and stapled each page together, and it is almost as tall as my room.
Oh my goodness.
So I actually have this massive scroll, which you can hear me leaping through it right now. Anyway, let's see. March, April, oh, god dang it. Bear with me. You can hear this ridiculous thing flopping around. 1923. January of 1923, the occupation of the Ruhr by French and Belgian troops, the start of passive resistance. So it's in September, the end of September, that the policy of passive resistance to the occupation is formally ended by the German government. Passive resistance, and Axel, I may lean on you a little bit here to remind everyone what this is, but passive resistance was effectively the German government saying, well, we don't like this, and I guess you can, with the situation of the French and Belgian occupation, to basically ensure the collection of the war debts, that had been placed on Germany for war reparations. The passive resistance policy was basically a way of saying, well, we can't, kick you out physically, but we can maybe spit in your face a little bit. Is that more? I feel
Absolutely, by not collaborating, but by not doing anything to assist you, and of course, occupying force doesn't have the local knowledge to administer, that's necessary to administer the region. So they need the collaboration of authorities, and that collaboration was withdrawn with passive resistance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so by the end of September, the government formally ends this policy. And yeah, on the 10th of October, Brander, Borche, and Heckert join the Zeigner government is that in Saxony? Is that the Saxony government?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. And all right. So it's on the 21st that the German Social Democrats, the left Social Democrats, who had been kind of, much better allies, shall we say, than the kind of the main leadership of the SPD. They had been more at least slightly more reliable allies of the communists than they had. So, but they have this hesitation at this conference, and they refuse to join the call for a general strike. And the result of this is basically nothing happens, or the moment passes them. The moment that possibly existed for this insurrection passes them by, and yeah, I think is that a pretty good summary of that.
Yes.
All right, and then in chapter 42, there's so much going on in terms of what the international movement is trying to kind of make of this of the aftermath of this defeat, which is the chapter's title, "The Aftermath of Another Defeat." They are trying to kind of tease out the political consequences, but this is also complicated by the power struggle that's going on within both the Russian Communist Party and within the Communist International, which is dominated by the Russian Party at this point still. So these questions become kind of touchy, to say the least, about how to interpret this defeat in Germany, and what should we do next, and how should we move forward from here. And frankly, I don't have a good summary written down here, so I'm gonna have to rely on this kind of bullet list that's on page 824. So this is the summary of the mistakes that they thought the KPD had made in the course of these events here. One, not having recognized sufficiently soon the significance of the great struggles of the workers previous to the strike against Kuno in August, and consequently not having modified the line of the party accordingly. Two, not having begun the military preparations, at least when the Ruhr was occupied, which led subsequently to carrying out these preparations in an overly hasty manner. Three, having acted as a brake on the mass movements in September and October in order to conserve the workers' strength for the quote-unquote decisive blow. Four, having had illusions about the left social democratic leaders and then having propagated those illusions. Five, having failed to use the positions that they had won in Saxony to mobilize the masses. Six, having made the preparations with only the final battle in view, whilst rejecting and even discouraging the organization of partial actions. Seven, having made forecasts and calculations on a basis of abstract reasoning, which led the party, quote, always to steal away in the face of a fight. 8, having overestimated the importance on the number of rifles and underestimated that of the will of the proletarian vanguard to fight. And 9, finally, having elaborated too rigid a plan on the basis of their incorrect calculations. So, like, they are definitely dragging them over the coals, but, like, they're not, at least this is my read on it. They are very much dragging the KPD over the coals for this, but it does not seem to be kind of wholly in bad faith, at least. I think partially what Broué says, and please correct me here if I'm wrong, but I think partially what he's saying is that the Comintern is trying to kind of wash its hands of its any kind of bad advice it gave the KPD, and
Indeed, yes.
kind of say, well, if you guys had just been more correct about these things, then you would have had fewer problems. And I think, like, again, like I'm trying to look at this kind of dialectically. I think there are, I kind of preface this with, I don't think these criticisms are wholly in bad faith, and I don't think that their total goal, at least, was to, like, I think that the Comintern trying to wash its hands of the situation was definitely a component, but I don't think that it was, at least this is my read on it, and perhaps it's naive, I don't think that the goal of this critique was wholly that. I do think that they were trying, on the one hand, trying to wash their hands of it, but on the other, I don't think it was completely cynical.
Yeah, they definitely try to learn something, to draw some rational lessons from this. Yeah, so it's an apt dialectical interpretation containing both, their attempt to distance themselves from the failure and at the same time trying to analyze how this came to be. And it's not even right to call it a failure, because revolutions are very complicated things, and they don't, work according to schedules you can predict. There are certain windows and opportunities, but things can change. It's like the wind at sea, and navigating things is so immensely complicated. There's so many different factors involved. Pointing fingers is definitely the wrong approach. And I mean, there is some finger pointing, but it doesn't dominate.
Yeah, right. And I think that uh, I think that part of the reason that, again, that the Russians had perhaps put too much faith and enthusiasm is because they really wanted it to happen. um,
Yeah.
and they were really disappointed when it came, you know, crashed on the rocks, and understandably so. Um, right.
We have the benefit of hindsight, and it's
Right.
so easy
Yes.
to to underestimate what it looked like to participants
Oh,
who did
yes.
not know how it's going to unfold. And
Yeah.
revolutions are always a long shot.
Right.
So I mean, always something against the odds. If you want to be victorious, you have to have a overly optimistic assessment, because it is so risky and defeat is so likely. So if you want to have a reasonable chance, you need to believe in the impossible.
Right. Yes, yes. This is, I think, a very important point that now that we're finished with the summaries, I think I would really like to elaborate on a bit. And I don't want to keep us here past uh, the next. I want to try to wrap things up by the end of the hour, so I don't want to spend too much more time on this here. But um, I think that there is that element of uh, I struggle to call it irrationality, but uh, again, like you said, that this kind of faith that the impossible can happen does, I think, require a certain measure of uh, obviating those facts that uh, that that may maybe seem like they're insurmountable, uh, and I think that this has certain advantages because um, right, like if you believe that you can't win from the get-go, then of course you're not going to win. um,
Yes, absolutely.
but I think Gramsci's aphorism of pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will is really applicable there.
Absolutely.
And uh, I've said I have a lecture that I'm also putting together for my chapter of the Democratic Socialists of America. But exactly what you said about hindsight, I think, is another thing that we've definitely emphasized throughout our discussion group here. I write, it is always tempting when looking back on such pivotal tipping points in history such as this to think of what could have happened had conditions been ever so slightly more favorable. Um, right? And I think there's been, and I think you can probably attest to this as a historical scholar yourself, that there's been a lot of ink spilled on the topic of what could have happened if the German Revolution had been successful or more successful, right?
Absolutely. Yes.
And uh, right. So I say later in this partial script for this lecture that I have planned, I said, however, to simply reduce the problem of revolution in those nations to the kind of economic kind of a deterministic attitude does grave insult to the people who actually tried to make it happen, and their martyrs and everyone who lived to tell the tale as well. And it kind of forecloses the possibility of revolution in favor of kind of this smug historical told you so-ism.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right? And I think that there's this temptation in this way, and this is again, I'm quoting from my own lecture here. In this way, the names of Luxembourg and Liebknecht cannot be remembered as tragic heroes of an inexorably lost cause, but as revolutionaries whose political horizon was decidedly not yet written in stone, and a promise to those who have struggled for a better world before us that we will commit to our memories the experience of their victories and defeats in service that we will someday realize their strangled dreams. That's
Absolutely. That's very good. Yeah.
That's me at my most poetic.
Yeah.
But yeah, really, like there's all kinds of temptations that we as readers of history, as students of history, have these temptations to view things as being far more overdetermined than perhaps they were. That right, because there's so many.
Because now we see what happened and we assume, well, what happened is what was meant to happen. What
Right.
It's the only thing that could have happened. You know, this respect for the existing system, the existing order, the existing trajectory, as opposed to healthy awareness of the range of possibilities.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think really that I think maybe it's even a quote from the great Red Rosa herself, which is that revolution before it happens seems impossible, but after it happens, it will be looked at as inevitable.
Absolutely.
And I think this is I want to perhaps extend that aphorism to more general historical phenomenon, which is that, after something happens, it's easy to look back at, data that you wouldn't have had, perhaps, to look at facts in new light, in light of their own aftermath, and say, "Oh,
Yeah.
well, of course, how did we not see this coming?" But
Yes.
the matter of fact is that, well, perhaps somebody saw it coming. I'm not saying that nobody saw these things coming, but at the same time, it's the temptation, of course, is to look back and say, it's the it's fallacious thinking of looking back and saying, yes, we should have known all along, right? Well, no. Frankly, there's so many contingent factors that come in and undermine everyone's crystalline predictions, right?
Absolutely. And certain things you cannot know, right? You can try your very best to make a guesstimate of what the situation is, looking at the various factors, trying to assess the balance of forces, etc., etc. But it's impossible to really predict the outcome, because things I remember, even with simple things like when I applied for jobs, and I expected I put a lot of effort into one venue and I thought things worked out well, and if you look at things rationally, that would have been where things had the highest probability of turning out well, and then they didn't turn out well there. They turned out well somewhere else where I did not really make such a great effort. So the point is, you never know. You can only, based on the information you have and your best abilities, do what you can, and then be surprised by the outcome.
Right. And yeah, it's the temptation of rationalizing things based on in new information, right? Um, and I think
Yeah.
this is perhaps, and this is maybe the tangent that we'll kind of end on, because I wanna kind of wrap things up here. But I think a lot about the intersection philosophically between my field, which is physics, and mathematics, and Marxism as a philosophical and political system, which is that, Marxism purports to be a scientific method, right? It purports to
Yes.
have no, have this epistemic claim that the world is knowable, right? But I think there's an important caveat to that, which is that uh, you know uh, uh, you can't know everything. Just because the world is knowable doesn't mean you can know everything. Uh, and there's a phenomenon within physics, uh, and known as chaos, which against the kind of popular kind of quotidian use of that word, chaos in the mathematical sense means that difference, small differences in initial conditions can lead to radically different outcomes. And the classical example of this in physics is two pendulums stacked, one with its hinge as the weight of the next one, because depending on the initial configuration of the heights of the pendula, uh, their paths through space are radically different, right? And that's just a very simple example, right? When we're talking about huge sociological systems within histories that we have, very incomplete information about, and ongoing events that we have very incomplete information about, then there's arises, I think, on this philosophical level about how, to what extent we can claim to be a scientific methodology, right? Because we can only there arises a calculation problem, right? we can
Yes.
we can we can say these are the balance of forces as we see them, as Marxists are wont to do. Something that we like to talk about a lot is balances of forces and class composition and all these other kind of big sociological facts. Uh, but I think, as Mao points out, contradiction is at the heart of all things, right? And that, I think, leads to some very uh, uh, frankly unpredictable
The
situations.
subjective factors, absolutely
Absolutely.
something Marx himself
Right.
emphasized a great deal, even as a young philosophy student.
Hmm.
So, Kautsky's more deterministic type of
Right.
Marxism. It's not the only kind of Marxism. They're not just blind laws.
Right.
There is choice and subjective factors, and it's not just a matter of a universe unfolding and us stepping back and watching the laws of
Right.
history fulfilling themselves. We have to be directly involved in the struggle. The world will not get better on its own.
Yes, absolutely. And I think on a philosophical level, perhaps a paradigm shift from that kind of rigid determinism of the Newtonian paradigm to the advent, and this is actually coincides perfectly with the period of history that we're talking about, incidentally, the transition from the Newtonian paradigm to the quantum paradigm of reality at the most fundamental level being fuzzy and indeterminate. Um,
Yes,
the
absolutely.
If you consider physicists philosophers, then Werner Heisenberg uh, saying that called it the I can't remember the German word for it, but we unfortunately in English is called the uncertainty principle of quantum mechanics, but it's got a much it's more, I think, better translates as the indeterminacy principle, but I think also exemplified in this philosophical debate between Einstein and Niels Bohr. Einstein was famously very skeptical of this idea of contingency and indeterminacy being so baked into our universe, and he very famously said, God does not play dice with the universe.
Yes,
And
yeah,
Niels
yes.
Bohr's infamous response to this is, "Don't tell God what to do." Bohr, by the way, is an atheist.
Yes, yes.
But we are at 6 o'clock here, and I want to be respectful of your time, Professor. So I will, if you'd like, give you a couple of minutes to wrap up, talk about any takeaways that you want our listeners to go home with tonight, and or maybe questions that you'd like them to think about, or anything like that, or yeah, I'd hand the mic over to you.
Yeah, so, again, as we said at the beginning, studying the German Revolution is particularly relevant today because we are, if not in a revolutionary situation, maybe we're approaching a revolutionary situation, and we certainly need a revolutionary situation in as much as the problems we're facing are accumulating more and more in terms of pandemics generated by capitalism like COVID-19, and there will be more pandemics down the road. There will be deadlier pandemics down the road. The climate change crisis, we only have a few decades before things begin to really disintegrate in terms of parts of our planet becoming uninhabitable. The food systems will collapse. There will be hundreds of millions of refugees. So the capitalist system is absolutely unsustainable. We need an alternative. History, of course, is open-ended in as much as a positive outcome is not guaranteed. A negative outcome is also not guaranteed. Ultimately, it depends on many different factors, including our willingness to fight. Then, of course, we should think about what a revolution would look like today. Obviously, 100 years have passed. The state is much more powerful today than it was at the beginning of the 20th century. So an insurrectionary approach definitely would have to be augmented by something else, and we have to figure out what that might be, what new techniques, what new modes of organizing we can and must come up with. The German Revolution contained the possibility of building a type of socialism that would have been very different from the sort of state socialism that eventually evolved in the Soviet Union with Stalinism and everything associated with Stalinism. So the German Revolution is also a story of unfulfilled potential, but a potential that is unfulfilled doesn't mean it has to be forever unfulfilled. So the legacy of the German Revolution is it's still an ongoing project. It's not over yet. The problems and the challenges that the German Revolution tried to solve are even more acute today, and they need to be solved in a global fashion. So I very much enjoyed being on this segment, as I enjoyed being on the segment a few months ago, and I wish you all the best with finishing the book, and keep reading things on the German Revolution as well as revolutions in general. And most of all, try to participate in making revolutions unfold in the here and now as well.
Very well put. Thank you so much. Yeah, there's been interest expressed from some folks who have talked to me about having a look at the Haitian Revolution and its real central importance of the Haitian Revolution in the struggle, the resistance struggles of Black and brown folks in the Americas.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
yeah, so
It's of course C.L.R. James's classic account, The Black Jacobins, other books.
Yeah, there's also I believe Cedric Robinson's Black Marxisms, I think something like that. I can't remember offhand, but those are definitely other titles. Our friend of the show and attendee here, Brianna of the channel Brianna's Library. Please go subscribe to her, by the way. Brianna's Library on YouTube. She's an excellent lefty book reviewer and comrade. Please check out her content. It's fabulous. Anyhow, she probably directs you to much better books on the legacies of Black Marxism and indigenous resistance than I can. I think my scope is pretty limited. It's frankly, pretty Eurocentric. I'll admit, which I'm working on, but gotta kind of understand one's limitations before you can overcome them, of course. Anyhow, I want to thank everyone once again for tuning in. If you liked the show, once again, consider contributing financially if you're able to. Patreon.com/a world to win. But barring that, please like, comment, subscribe, and share this video. Share my channel with folks who are interested in getting into some Marxist political education. And our next session will be 2 weeks from today at the same time at 3:30 Pacific, 6:30 Eastern. So that will be August 9th at the time I just said. And hopefully we'll have the whole regular crew back. Things have been pretty chaotic, and I just wanted to end with saying, please, wherever you are in the world, tune into what's going on here in Portland. Things are absolutely terrifying, but also very hopeful. There has been just an outpouring of community anti-fascist defense of our city, and in support of the Black Lives Matter movement and the struggle to abolish the police and kick the federal law enforcement agencies out of here before worse things happen. Anyhow, thank you everyone once again for